out as an exchange student in Nagoya, Japan, and today he is the Study and Go Abroad Coordinator at Watson University.
Well, thank you very much to Melissa for that lovely introduction. Now that you know a little bit about why I'm here, let's get into what we're going to be going through today. The whole reason we have this seminar presenting for you study abroad alumni and those of you interested in studying abroad is because I know that somewhere buried in your suitcase, maybe covered in dust because it's been a little while, there's some hidden value for you to uncover. And if you're ready and willing, I'd love nothing more than to help you shine brighter as an alumni of Study Abroad. So let's get into what we're going to be talking about today. What are we doing? First, we'll cover 3 different things that we'll be thinking about. So first off is your study abroad. So I will bring in personal examples from my own study abroad experience, but primarily I'm really going to need you to put on your imagination cap and think back to your own study abroad experience. And if you've not yet studied abroad, imagine what it could be like to reflect on another transitional period in your life, say moving from junior high school to high school. We'll also be talking about why is it actually so tough to talk about to communicate the value of study abroad in terms of a professional context. The enthusiasm is there, but why is it really tough to communicate that value? And lastly, we'll be bringing in some language, some skills and competencies that can help you tap into what those employers are really listening for when you're communicating the value of your study abroad. 2 things that we'll be working through today are the activities that you have in your handout when you entered. So the first is our circle framework, which is going to help you unpack and reflect on your study abroad experience. The second activity is our STAR framework. So we're going to be introducing and articulating what you've unpacked in that initial activity. Does everyone have a handout? Everyone has a package? Yes, perfect. And we'll wrap up the session today with a few ways that you can express what you've articulated in both the circle and the STAR framework. And lastly, I'll leave you with additional resources that we don't have time to cover today, but will help you in your journey of getting more value from your study abroad experience. What you'll take away from today, some insight into what study abroad does and doesn't convey when you're talking to employers in terms of value. Those 2 framework activities, we're going to get you started on them today, but this is going to be a reflective activity and a tool you can continue to use. To expect you to fully utilize these tools today is a little bit much, so I highly encourage you to take this back as homework and continue to reflect on these experiences. You'll also get a little bit of ability to discuss those relevant skills and competencies when you're talking to employers. And lastly, there's a study abroad alumni directory I built just for you, just for this session. It's linked to you on the bottom of all your handouts, so you'll have that to continue on this path that you're already starting by coming here to this session. Now that we've established what we're going to be covering today, I need a little bit of your participation. I need you to transport yourself back to your study abroad experience for that transitional period if you haven't yet had it. It's Thursday, of course, so we'll do a little Throwback Thursday for the occasion. So how did you feel when you were leaving? Do you remember the smell of the airplane food? The feeling of the not so comfortable airplane chair you sat in for hours on end? Maybe the bustle of babies crying in the aisles? How did you feel when you were in that airplane leaving for your study abroad experience? You got some ideas? Helping jog your memory? Who did you get to know? Do you remember that moment? Almost like the moment when you realize this movie's gonna be good. Do you remember the first person who gave you that feeling when you started your experience? Do you remember more than that person all throughout? Maybe the person you made absolutely sure you said goodbye to before going back home. And lastly, what did you bring back with you? Both literally, what did you stuff in your suitcase and manage to get within the weight allowance? And figuratively, what kind of experiences really stuck with you? The kind of things that was really hard to talk about with friends who didn't study abroad, who weren't there along with you. What else did you bring back with you? So we've established a lot of the emotional connection you have to your study abroad, or whatever experience you're deconstructing right now, you're unpacking. I imagine there's probably some enthusiasm about what you just pictured. Yeah, I'm seeing some nodded heads. Okay, that's good, that's good. Now, the challenge here is, how do you take that enthusiasm about your study abroad experience and make sure you're communicating the value of it in a professional context? It's very ethereal, it's very wide-ranging what you were just picturing. So how do you break it down for an employer? If you're like most study abroad students, including myself, when someone asks you, how was your exchange? Maybe you replied with, it was life-changing. It was amazing. I had such an awesome time. You feel that enthusiasm, right? And maybe if you studied abroad, that resonates with you. Now picture yourself in front of an interviewer, maybe a hiring manager, someone who's interviewing you for your school applications. How do you think they're hearing what you're saying? They might actually be thinking, all right, so you had fun and you partied a bunch. Cool. Maybe you get a little bit more detailed and you say, I learned a lot about the culture. It really made me reflect on my identity, maybe as a Canadian studying abroad. Maybe you picked up a second language, a third language. You learned a lot about the culture and yourself. They might be thinking, okay, so you traveled, how's that really relevant here? If you're picking up on the pattern here, you might be able to answer this next one. Now please raise your hand if you are guilty of ever uttering this phrase, I stepped out of my comfort zone. You are all virtuous, and I can't believe you've never uttered that, because I am so guilty of this. I'm glad to see a few other people are just as guilty, but they might also be thinking, oh, that's a bit of a cliche, but okay. Especially in the interview setting, that is, it's almost hard to avoid that type of phrasing. So we've set up why those generalizations about your study abroad experience don't necessarily immediately articulate the value to employers. What you're trying to avoid is the perception of academic tourism. While we might think it's very obvious that these values are explicit and obvious to other people, employees are actually reported as saying, when they hear about study abroad experiences, they have a perception that it's just academic tourism. You're going traveling and getting credit for it. They don't think too much beyond life outside of the classroom and maybe the parties that you had along with the people you got to know during your exchange or your study abroad experience. So how are we going to shift gears and move away from these very enthusiastic statements and summations of our study abroad experience in something that's really going to pinpoint what the employer is wanting to hear and will recognize the value? GoGlobalCanada.ca produced a report which indicated a series of different skills and competencies. Now there's 3 areas they identified these. The first being ones that are enhanced by international education. The second category are skills and competencies that are going to be needed to succeed in a 21st century workplace. And lastly, very explicitly, what are Canadian hiring managers literally looking for when they're viewing your resumes, they're posting job descriptions? What are they actually looking for that you need to signal? Fortunately, we've got a really good place to start because the ones enhanced by international education range quite far. And you might not have already acknowledged that while thinking about your study abroad experience, but I'm asking you now, please give yourself a little bit more credit than you might have already been doing. Planning and organization and resilience. If anyone's been through an application process to apply to a university, whether it be a full program or a semester or 2 weeks, you know it's very tedious and a mistake could mean a big loss of an opportunity. Those are the 2 ones that fall specifically under enhanced by international education. Where you're going to see an overlap of those other 2 categories is adaptability, creativity, and intercultural awareness. Those are the ones that are signals of the. Those are the ones that are reported to be what's needed in the 21st century workplace. And overlapping with both the 21st century workplace skills and competencies, as well as what Canadian hiring managers are looking for, are communication skills, collaboration and teamwork, interpersonal relationship skills, problem solving, and critical thinking. I bet you can find instances of these in your study abroad experience. What might be harder, did you want to take a photo? Okay. So what might be harder to articulate from your experience that is still needed in the 21st century workplace are things like curiosity, things like initiative, leadership, social awareness. And this is where those days and moments in between your study abroad experience are going to tell those stories. They're going to show examples of how you developed and grew in those areas. In terms of what Canadian hiring managers are looking for, these are some things that are going to be a little bit more hard to dig out of explicitly from your study abroad experience. You're going to have to dig a little bit deeper into the surrounding life, the circle, if you will. So that brings us to our next activity. So we're going to be communicating the value of study abroad to employers through the circle framework to unpack and reflect the experiences you had abroad. You can refer to your handouts through this slide for more notes, but let me explain the framework first. There's 4 different components we're going to concentrate on today. I'm going to ask you to make a few notes. You don't have to get super detailed today because, again, this is a tool you can continue to work with from here on out. As you move throughout your career, as you're looking at new job postings, as you're thinking about where you're going to move in your future. The first being identities and communities. We'll then head into challenges and obstacles, followed by your journey and your growth, and finishing off with your teams and your candidates. Don't worry, I'll explain what each of these is relating to in just a short bit. So who's with me? Are you ready to unpack and reflect? Great. So your identity and your communities. I'm going to spend less time on this one because it's more superficial level. So this is where you're going to identify what associations did you have or did you take part in while you were studying abroad. That could be what jobs you took on part-time, if you volunteered anywhere. It could be informal roles that you played, such as organizing a group trip to a neighboring country with the rest of your exchange friends and local friends. It doesn't have to be explicitly like a thing that you would normally put on your resume, but it's a great starting point to figure out where can you dig out some of those skills and competencies. You may also think of the context of you being a Canadian studying amongst many different exchange students, maybe other Canadian students, maybe clashing between the perception of American students, and if you're Canadian, always having to establish that you're not actually American. So I'll give you about a minute and a half to just jot down. Again, you need a few words here and there just to get an overview for some of your identity and your communities that made up that experience. So if it's a little bit hard to pinpoint and pull out specific examples from your experience, feel free to circle some of those if they ring true to your own experience. On the back of the card is the writing space for you to make your notes down. 3 examples and you should be good. Is everyone ready to move on? Okay. So let's move on to your challenges and obstacles. Think back to the 3 periods involving your study abroad experience. Pre-departure, before you went. During your study abroad experience, while you're in the country. And re-entry, the period after you come back home. What were some things that you were fearful about? What did you worry about failing at? Did you have anxiety about disappointing yourself? If your application didn't work out, if you couldn't get the money together? Were you worried about disappointing your friends, your family, everybody you told that you were going to be studying abroad? That's a lot of weight to carry before you go. What was in front of you as an obstacle for you to study abroad? 3 periods, before, during, and after. So I'll give you about 2 minutes to jot down some notes about those. So let's move on to the next section of your circle. Now thinking back to those challenges and obstacles, what did you feel confident in? What scared you initially, but now no longer does? Can you navigate the metro system in Seoul like you've lived there all of your life? What kind of confidence did that instill in you? What type of skills might you have dug deep into, not just as a student, but as a full-time expat living abroad? So, looks like you already got the gist of this. I see you scribbling down notes, but I'll give you another about 2 or 3 minutes to make some notes here. Now it's time to move on to the last portion of your circle. Your teams and champions. So far, a lot of this has been self-reporting about things that you were anxious about or fearful about. Some skills that you may have developed, your journey and your growth, all from your perspective. This last piece ties it all together and goes beyond just your own opinion. Who are the people who can speak intimately to what you're actually like to work with? That can mean literally a part-time job you did while you were studying abroad. Could be academically, with group projects. All of your collaborators, all throughout the semester, maybe the 2-week field school you did. Maybe the full program, if you did your entire program. Can you articulate why they trust you? And if you can't, you at least know who to go to and find out why they did. Can you speak to why they were grateful they trusted you? Not just handing you the project, but really happy that they did. So again, I'll give you about 2 minutes to jot down some names that come to mind. circle framework. I'd like to get a feel for how that experience was going through that activity. Any words come to mind? Any brave souls out there? Maybe you in the back?
It's nice to remember the trip. Made me happy to think of everything that happened. Want to go back.
So it maybe was a little bit dusty, right? Some memories you tucked away a little long ago. That's great. You might have noticed under each of the rating spaces on the back of the cards, it says where this is actually going to fit into your star. So I'm really glad to hear it made you happy to think back to those memories, but I promise there's a practical piece to this too. We're going to talk about where you can unpack this and articulate it in your star framework next. You might also have noticed there's skills and competencies mentioned below where it's applicable on your star. As you're thinking about all these pieces of your circle, you can begin to circle, underline, maybe even add your own skills and competencies you started to acknowledge and recognize that you had through your study abroad experience. That's what you're going to tie in to the next piece and get a little bit more deeper into the specific language those employers are going to be listening for. So our next activity is turning your circle into a star. This is where you're going to be looking at where does this apply to your star on the back of those cards. That's your starting point for the ideas. You haven't done this work for nothing. This is a great way to jog your memory, get specific about those details, so then you can pull them into some anecdotes that I'll explain on the next slide. May I get a show of hands if you've ever been in an interview before? Okay. A few that didn't raise their hands, try to imagine what it would be like to interview for a volunteer position, a part-time job. It doesn't necessarily have to be, a permanent position down the road. Anything where you're being asked questions about your resume, what got you interested in the position, so put yourself in those shoes. Oftentimes, employers will ask behavioral questions to dig a little bit deeper beyond your resume. Things like, tell me about a time where you made a mistake and disappointed somebody, what you did to resolve it. Very broad, open-ended question. Great opportunity to go beyond that bullet point of your study abroad experience and pull out a great anecdote that shows a lot of those skills and competencies they may be looking for. So the STAR framework works like this. There's 5 different points. It moves from situation to task, to action, to results, and finally to relevance. And the benefits of going through this framework is that you can concisely sum up the skills and competencies and demonstrate how you're not just listing them on your resume, but where they're actually fitting within your experiences up until then. I'd like to give you a specific example from my study abroad experience to let you know how this kind of works. So pulling from my own circle, I'm going to go through an example, and following that, I'm going to ask you to start thinking about your own star. When I was an exchange student studying in Japan, I was asked if I wanted to work part-time in their international lounge, assisting local students, international students, exchange students with their language learning, their own plans for exchange, and even their exchange experience while they're in Japan. As a student assistant, we were expected to provide exceptional customer service skills to ensure the university had a welcoming place for people who are interested in learning languages, studying abroad, just generally curious about people of various different backgrounds. The difficult part was this required speaking both English and Japanese. Now, Japanese being my second language, this wasn't always easy to do. Because I was expected to introduce myself and note down every single person that came into the eye lounge, so we had a record of who came in and out, and could build that relationship over time and ensure those people were getting the support they needed. I started asking my coworkers, hey, can you tell me a little bit of details about that person over there? I started writing down some of the names after I would speak to somebody. It prompted me to move beyond my natural introverted tendencies and start approaching people and offering them support and seeing ways that we can connect. As a result, I made some of the closest friends during that 1 year abroad who I still think back so fondly with just the slightest reminder of what they meant to me. What it meant to the team, I'd like to share in someone else's words. This was from my supervisor, Yuka. Joseph, I'm deeply grateful for you being who you are and everything you've done for us. You are my hero, and I'll never forget about you. Please keep in touch. We love you tons. Yuka. This is the card that my coworkers wrote me after I completed the exchange and after that term of working alongside them. It's a piece of evidence that shows it's not all in my head. I guess I made a bit of a difference in the office. I was the only exchange student who was offered a part-time position. It was all Japanese students and coworkers. Not an easy task to take on, but I'm so happy that they trusted me, and now I know why they trusted me. Now, let's talk about the relevance. Now, if I'm in that interview situation, how do I connect this to this position that we're specifically interviewing for? Well, I can talk about those customer service skills that I developed. Not only speaking English, but a foreign language to me. I can talk about the insights and humility that it instills upon you by having to write down names, by having to very carefully introduce yourself to people that you're not familiar with. And what I can offer to your company is that same level of initiative, that same willingness to adapt to new situations that are very uncomfortable for the greater good of your organization and what we're trying to achieve as a team. So we've taken what is a very amorphous experience of studying abroad for multiple weeks, months, years, and we've taken a specific anecdote out of it that establishes not only what happened there, but how it relates back to that very interviewer who's sitting across from you wondering what you can offer to this position, their company, to the role. So I'd like you to take a few minutes to now go through this activity, and you'll see on each of these points, situation is linked to your identities and communities. Your task, you're going to draw from your challenges and obstacles. Your action will come from your journey and growth, as well as your results. That's also going to come from journey and growth. And finally, the relevance. That's going to come from your teams and champions. So take a few minutes, see if you can pick just one story connecting some of those pieces of your circle to draw one star. This is a starting point, remember. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to make progress. I won't hold that against you if you want to keep it private, but I will remind you, this tool does not end here today. This is a kind of framework you can continue to break down your study abroad experience. When you're looking at job applications, maybe applying to grad school, this is what you can come back to again draw on what you built up, what you took back from that experience. I encourage you to talk to your guidance counselors, your career services support network. These are the kind of people that are very well equipped to help you dive deeper and spend a little bit more time articulating. So you've got 2 activities now. You're a little bit closer to understanding how to communicate the value of your study abroad to employers. Now let's look at different applications and ways you can now express the notes that you've taken down. On the spectrum to get you all the way to that very exciting interview, you've got opportunities to write an article about your study abroad experience. Study and Go Abroad Fair loves to hear from alumni, as well as BC Study Abroad. If you want to create a personal website, you can incorporate it there. LinkedIn profile, your resume, if you're building a portfolio, say you're in design, maybe you create a video essay to incorporate what you pulled out here. All of that can come from your circle, where you can start to apply those 5 points of your STAR are in cover letters in your applications. In casual conversation, if somebody prompts you with a question, how was your study abroad experience? Are you going to give them the general statement you've been telling everybody who doesn't have time to hear the whole story? Or are you going to pull out that specific STAR and give them something more meaningful and meaty? And of course, in the interview setting, that's where you're going to be asked those behavioral questions to incorporate exactly what you've articulated here. Now that we've given you the frameworks, I want to leave you with further resources and examples to follow. If you visit this website, the short link, this directory I've created for study abroad alumni just like you, you're going to find research on study abroad outcomes, such as a hidden international competencies quiz. You're going to find tools to identify and highlight your growth, like a communicating the value of your study abroad experience online course. It's free. And lastly, you're going to find more examples of how people have specifically applied your circle and your STAR. Cover letter examples, resume examples, and interview examples. This link is on the bottom of your handout cards too, so don't worry about getting this one down. As long as you take those cards home with you, you got access. I'd like to close off by saying, this is how you can keep this thread going. It's easy to get excited in the middle of a study abroad fair about reflecting on your experience, but don't let it fizzle away and get dusty again. Don't tuck it away in the suitcase just yet. Maybe you bring it up for that Throwback Thursday every once in a while. If you want to keep in touch with other study abroad alumni, the Canadian Learning Abroad Alumni Community, CLAC for short, is a network of 500 members of a study abroad alumni community. It's supported by the Canadian Bureau of International Education and its member institutions all across Canada. And later this year, if LinkedIn isn't your thing, we have plans for a Facebook launch. You can visit this website. It's on the back of your STAR card as well to join the LinkedIn group. And if you want to keep in touch and find out about the Facebook group, my cards are just over on the table, and I'm more than happy to get in touch when we make that launch. I'd be more excited to launch it if I know who you're going to join it. Now, one last thing I'll mention is that for the practitioners today, we do have an alumni engagement session from 5 to 6 o'clock, followed by a networking reception. So please remember to head upstairs for that session. You'll see Chelsea over there from BC Study Abroad. And as well, if you're thinking about ways to apply your study abroad experience and want to start getting yourself ready for the job market, don't forget that there's LinkedIn headshots being done until 5 o'clock today. Even if you don't have a LinkedIn profile yet, take the photo ahead of time and you'll be ready to set one up, including your circle and STAR examples to apply to that. It's been such a pleasure to share this short amount of time with you. And if you ever want to continue that conversation, please grab one of my cards. This is my passion. It's engaging with you. Thank you for engaging with me.
Joseph, are you taking any questions?
I can take questions as we're cleaning up and switching over to the next presentation. And after that, I'll be stationed at the far left corner, so facing this direction, the far left corner, over the BC Study Abroad booth. So if you have questions beyond this little period, you're welcome to join me over there and we can chat. Thank you.